Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Indian Standard Time. And, sorry, Sohail corrects me, Harry Standard Time. But I must tell you that this is a place which is very well known as Goa. And when I first came to Goa 35 years ago, I learnt a phrase called Shuzagat. Shuzagat is a slang Portuguese phrase which means chill. So if it doesn't happen now, don't worry, it'll happen a little later. If it doesn't happen a little later, it'll happen tomorrow. If not tomorrow, a little bit like the Spanish hasta mañana, it'll happen sometime. So all of you in the power sector and the energy sector and all of you important people, I'm sure who live in India and countries like India know, chalta hai, don't worry. So if it didn't start at 6, it'll start at 6:30. If it didn't start at 6:30, well, it's taking off. Having said that, let me extend a very warm welcome to a lot of important people who've come. And I would like to basically run through the way the next few days are going to pan out so that you guys get geared up for the grueling session of mental thought process. And I'm very excited that in this particular event, we have a galaxy of people. Now, the unfortunate thing about organizing these galaxies is that these stars come and go, you know, like flashes. So a lot of people are coming in and going and coming in and going. So I suggest that you keep your eyes peeled if you want to meet up and have a one-on-one with anyone. But a big welcome to all of you. I want to especially welcome for my first panel, Dr. Nirmal Singh, the Deputy Chief Minister and Minister for Power, Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you, sir, for being here. Very grateful. If you'd like to get bored here or get bored there before I allow you to speak, you're welcome. Make yourself comfortable. In fact, if you sit here, at least people will get a chance to know you, sir. आपकी जान पहचान ज़रा अच्छी हो जाएगी. तारुफ अच्छा हो जाएगा, sir. आइए. I'd also like to welcome a man of all seasons, a global authority on everything, Mr. Sohail Seth. A round of applause. Sohail is, I can't describe him, so there's no point. He's a columnist, he's a writer, he's got his Twitter handle, he's got a handle on everything, and I don't want to go further. It's going to be great fun, Sohail. Thank you for coming. But I must acknowledge Sohail's contribution in making this one of the premier events for people who think about infrastructure and power. Over the last few years, he's been very instrumental in helping us put together some of the concepts and ideas. Thank you, Sohail. I'm now going to ask Ishmael Blackgrove to join us. Ishmael has come from London. And what is unique about this, welcome, please. Besides the fact that he's tall and good looking, Ishmael has lots of other qualities. He's one of the few guys I've been hearing for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years at a place called Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London. So he was saying, what am I going to be doing in this conference? And I said, well, you're going to be talking about, what we like to talk about. And so I'm going to get to that subject in a minute, but thank you, Ishmael, for coming all the way in. Happy to have you on board. Akhilesh Tilotia, if he's kind enough to come in. Now, Akhilesh is an amazing jewel, and I would like you to look at him carefully, because he's written a book called The Making of India. And Akhilesh works for Kotak Research, correct me if I'm wrong. But most importantly is what I liked about the way he presented his facts in his book is he has encompassed all aspects of the economy, infrastructure, GDPs, and all of that stuff. So he's going to talk about that. And last and least is me, Harry Dhaul. Thank you, RR. So sweet of you. Thank you. You know, ladies and gentlemen, to those of you who've come here the first time, there's some regulars, who come and keep, so they use, okay, At this time, you have to clap, so they clap. Okay. Very sweet of you. Thank you. I feel very happy and privileged. Now, what we planned for this next few days is the following. We planned that we're going to talk about a general subject every day in the morning. And the subject is the epochal shift in the idea of India, meeting aspirations. And this is where we're going to have a variety of speakers who are not necessarily from the power sector or the oil sector or the gas sector or our regulators or our policymakers or ministers or bureaucrats, but are people who are, shall we say, in the throes of making public opinion, in a sense, or people who are thinkers. And I just like to leave it at that. Now, particularly for Ishmael and another friend of mine called Mr. Khu, who's here from Speaker's Corner, when we say the epochal shift in the idea of India, while we can talk about India, but a lot of what we say about India is about the developing world. And just some numbers, 7 point some odd billion people on the planet, large part of it is the developing world. So meeting their aspirations is not just Indian people's aspirations, but aspirations globally. And so we're going to talk about that. And then we will follow it up with the technical sessions where we will have, you know, a refresher for the regulators and the policymakers and the people in the industry to have a sense of what's happening. Because a lot of things are happening at a very high speed. And as you grow slightly older, I am not old, excuse me, I'm very young, I think. But I'm also beginning to realize the speed with which things are happening. You start tending to see gaps in your information or in your ability to absorb and process them like the younger people are. So so now I'm beginning to understand what is a generational gap in thinking. Now, I'm going to go into this presentation. I'm going to bore the hell out of you so that you guys get ready to hear the real speakers. But I'm also wanting to provoke you and set the tone. And before I get into that, let me just share that there is a program, and if you don't have it, I'll just run through it. This is the broad subjects. We finish with this one session now, and then we drown ourselves in joy and applause and celebration of being in Goa. Then tomorrow morning we have, again, different speakers like Devdutt Patnaik, Mr. D.K. Shiv Kumar, who is the Minister of Energy, Government of Karnataka, Haiko Khu from Speaker's Corner, Vishwas Pathak, and whatever, who are again going to relook at the subject in different ways. And then we start the technical sessions. Theme of the day, 24/7, power for all. And then you have the changing perceptions of the role of the private sector in the development of India's infrastructure, a very important subject. Because of ABC reasons, and I'll go into in a minute, the role of the private sector is coming into question, whether it is the coal gate, or it's the 2G, or whatever scam you can think of. There's always this element of private-public, private-government, private-public perception. So we're going to look at that, and we have an amazing panel there. Then the future of power distribution companies in the context of content and carriage, regulatory assets, legacy issues, financial health of distribution companies, universal service obligations, and the impact on open access. And then we run across balanced part of the day with 2 more sessions. One is saying power transmission, current issues and challenges, near, medium, and long-term scenarios. And we end the day with fuel for power, past, present, and future. Unfortunately, the chairman of Coal India couldn't come. He has a severe back problem, but he has nominated almost 3 major people from Coal India. So we'll be happy to have them on board and have them speak tomorrow. Having said that, let's quickly lay down what the objectives are of this conference and how the thought process of organizing this event has been put together. When you talk about a concept like India, I mean, you can spend years discussing it, and you can have debates, and you can have all kinds of, ideas about what India really is. So what I'm about to say is not a complete thing, and I know it, and I'm only just going to throw out ideas, which I'm very good at, and then provoke you guys. And the piece of good news is that we're starting late, and the further piece of good news is we can end late. The bar will open, of course, in 1.5, 2 hours. But the other good news is you can ask questions. Okay, so don't hesitate. Idea of India, I start with the word development. Then I start with the word private profit versus public good. And then I go to the epical shift, where we have this concept of democracy. Though there's an unequal society in India as there is in the rest of the world, what is democracy all about in the Indian context to start with? Now, Milton Hayes said, in defining India, then India, everyone has his own idea of India. Very beautifully put. Everyone has his own concept. Chalta hai. To those of my friends who are from abroad, I request you to get someone to translate for you what is chalta hai. But it is a challenge. Is it a repository of age-old knowledge and spirituality? We have very strange DNA. We have this ability to go inside, internally, and cut ourselves off from the external, either for minutes or seconds or days or months or whatever. And this is something unique, because we have this huge spiritual, cultural background. Is it a melting pot of different cultures? I was just reading recently, they found some remains on the coast of Kerala of a port which has been there since 3000 or 2000 BC. And they're very fascinated by it because it's got all kinds of artifacts of trade with Egypt and whatever else was there in those days. I'm not such a good student of history. So we had the Greeks, and we've had the Portuguese, and we've had the French and the Dutch, and we've had the English, and we've had the Jews, and we've had the Islamic faith people coming in. We have had Christians, and we have had all types of Christians coming in. And what is it what is this great thing about India where it just keeps absorbing over the last many millennia? Or is India defined by its $2 trillion economy, military prowess, and a potentially bright future? Now, much before the concept of globalization was espoused by the West, India preached the essence of one world beyond the counters of geographical and cultural boundaries through the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbam, meaning the world is one family. So to them, it didn't matter who you are, what you were, which culture you came from, what language you spoke. It was fine. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the newspaper. The Siddhis on the western bank of Maharashtra, a little north of here, look like Africans, have been here for the last 1,500, 2,000 years. They are Africans in origin, and they're pretty good sailors, because they're originally sailors. So there was an article about how a Siddhi guy was given acknowledgement for outstanding sports. It was also known as Sone ki Chidiya. Sone ki Chidiya in a literal English translation would be the golden bird, because India's counters look like a bird. And in the 16th and 17th century, it was an economic giant, almost controlling 25% of global trade. That's a lot of global trade. And you had the textile industry with Gujarat, and you had cotton and silk from Cambay, and you found its way to Western Europe, South Africa, Southeast Asia, Malabar, Cambay. Then you had the Vijayanagar Empire. The inland trade was very active. There's vibrant trade, the Arab world and East Africa. But India had its own laws, own culture, and own models of governance. India in those days had its own laws, and one of them was self-sufficiency and interdependence were a hallmark of rural life. Such a system ensured everyone's contribution as well as shares in the economic life of the village, putting it permanently on even keel. So if I had to cut rice or sugarcane, I could ask my neighbor to help, and he would. And when it was time to cut his rice, I would help him cut his crop. So there was this mutual interdependence, which is normal, no big shakes. A unique land ownership pattern was the second feature. Peasant families did have hereditary rights to cultivate the land from generation to generation. The traditional Hindu king could only collect 1/6 of the produce from the peasant, but kings could not dispossess or change the hereditary right of the cultivators. Interesting. The Mughals, when they came, did some changes in the land revenue collection system, including payment in cash and collection through intermediaries. But even they did not have the right to dispossess the cultivators so long as they were willing to pay the rent. The genesis of the predicament was when the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company landed up. Interestingly, the first European trading post was in 1602, and I mentioned this date for you to mark, north of Calcutta in a place called Chinsura. And in those days, it was called, my pronunciation is brilliant, so it's called Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, which was the Dutch name, and it was referred to by the British as the Dutch East India Company. Now, why is this significant? Because the fund starts from here. We had 25% of global trade, and the onset of these companies, which had charters from their royal, this thing started off in 1602. Originally, they chartered as the Governor and Company of Merchants of London and to East Indies. The companies rose to account for half of the world trade. So now it became 50% of the world trade was controlled by a private sector company. Why I'm on this point is to, when I opened my remarks, is to the suspicion of the private sector, is a background to it. And this included cotton, silk, indigo, dye, salt, pepper, tea, and opium. The company also ruled the beginnings of the British Empire in India. From the beginning of the 17th century to the beginning of the 19th century, the whole era reflected a hunger for industrial revolution and a race for profit as the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British got involved in fierce competition amongst themselves in their race to outpace each other. Everyone wanted to get on this bandwagon of 500% profit, 300% profit, go down to India, get the stuff, get into Europe, all these goods, you make tons of money. And of course, the other advantage was you got everybody high because you were giving them good opium on the side. Very important at sometimes, de-stress. The systematic destruction of the Indian economy started in the early 19th century. The East India Company had cut off the hands of hundreds of weavers in Bengal in order to destroy the indigenous weaving industry in favor of British textile imports. Some anecdotal accounts say the thumbs of the weavers of Dhaka were removed. So there was no competition, and all about fair play. The exploitation of the Indian market and of the Indian raw materials provided the basis for the British industrial revolution in the 19th century. What you see in a developed country like England today, our forefathers and our ancestors, and in Africa and in parts of the United States, have contributed enormously for it. But one of the things it did was interesting. It destroyed the village economy in Indian agriculture. How did it do that? The British introduced the zamindari culture since East India Company got the Diwani right in 1765. So from 1602, we ran to 1765. Its primary aim was to collect as much land revenue as humanly possible with its newly acquired authority. It unscrupulously extracted, remember, private sector, extraction, the maximum land revenue possible from peasants, so much so that Bengal suffered a famine in 1769-1770, which wiped out 1/3 of the population. The quintessence of the new system was that job of revenue collection was given to the highest bidder, or the one who promised maximum revenue collection. The new system only accelerated the pace and process of ruin of the peasantry. So, if gentleman A ran away from his land because of starvation, then I, as the collector Saab, would be able to put it up for rent, and then he would come and say, well, I'm willing to pay 2 rupees per annum for this land. And Mr. Raja says, no, 2 rupees, I'll pay 225. Mr. Raja becomes the owner of the land. That's it. As long as the guy who bids the highest takes the land. So all of a sudden, the hereditary ownership of land was broken. The following increased the grip of the British on India and increased the apprehension of Indian people. There were 3 things that happened which changed things a lot in the 19th century. One was the invention of the steam engine. It used to take 9 months for a British ship to come in to India with a message or with instructions or whatever. It used to take 9 months to go back. But with the steam engines coming in, the ships were converted from sailboats. And there also in those 9 months, you were dependent on weather and storms and the monsoons and the winds. But the steam engine came and sorted that out. The second thing that happened in the middle of the 19th century is the invention of the telegraph. The telegraph was invented by a private chap and was set up for private purposes, but the government took it over. Queen Victoria was fascinated by it. She had a little room in her palace where she would have a telegraph room. So she was very fascinated that in 6 hours she could get information about what's happening in her distant land. And then capital and labor as factors of production for large-scale mechanized production was a death knell for traditional handicraft and handloom products of India. So whatever was the strength of India, of being able to give thousands of jobs, weaving, textiles, whatever, was completely destroyed in favor of mechanized mass production. Now, I am reading out all of this. It may sound a little boring, but bear with me, because you'll find it has a pretty explosive connection with what's happening in India today. Much in contrast with the Indian dominance in global trade till the 16th century, the next 2 centuries saw rising dominance of the British Empire in world trade that went hand in hand with the impoverishment of the Indian economy. However, in the initial decades, the company stayed away. Now, it's a very important second strand of thought. However, in the initial decades, the company stayed away from religious and cultural affairs of the native Indians and did not interfere in the same at all. 2 fascinating facts out of history. If you look at the Barber's court, when he first came in 1500 and whatever, you found that you had 90% of the people in his court were Arabs stroke Persian, and maybe 10% were semi-whatever. By the time Akbar came into power, 90% of the courtiers were of Indian origin. So there was a shift. Similarly, the same thing happened here. Then the East India Company started doing business. It was only interested in profit, right? But then something happened. And what is that something that happened? Again, which affected us and affects us even today. They never interfered in the religion or the culture of the natives till then. From an era of profit only, now we started going into a new hang-up. It was called Anglicization of India. The same thing happened in Africa. The same thing happened in the West Indies. It happened in other parts. Macaulay, who espoused the concept of the Bible, all men are equal, and the arrival of Hastings and Bentinck witnessed a paradigm shift in the approach of the empire towards India. This was very important because this is where the problem began. The philosophy of the empire changed from profit only to, while doing business, try to convert people into British kind of thought. So now the Brown Sahib, as we were known, as my teacher would teach me, is the Brown Sahib started becoming the favorite. Now the means to achieve the same were export of British culture, convert the heathen, spreading the gospel of Christ. 1857, Bentinck came in 1826 or something. It took a good 25-30 years for this to build up. And the first organized resistance against the Raj took place in 1857. Please remember, till 1857, you're still dealing with a private company. In many respects, the acts of the evangelists, the organized crippling of traditional handicraft industry and destruction of Indian agriculture brought the Hindus and Muslims together against the British, that time known as Firangi, and culminated into the 1857 rebellion, which is the first sign of organized resistance. Fair enough. Now, the evangelist's approach towards faith based on absolute conformity and submission to one viewpoint has been much in contrast to what has always been the Indian Hindu philosophy. Remember what I said. We've been in business with global trade for 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years that we know about. And we had no hang-ups about who you were, what you were. You're most welcome. You go to the poorest house, knock on the door, the guy would call you and give you a cup of tea. Even if he doesn't have milk, he'll go to the next door neighbor and borrow it. And the next door neighbor will be happy to give him a little bit of milk for the guest. Here the word Hindu should be interpreted from a religious, from a cultural point of view rather than a religious point of view. For long, Hindu has been used to define anyone living on this side of the river Indus from the Himalayas to the Indian Ocean. And that's the context I'm talking in. For thousands of years, we've had our philosophy, and nothing defines it better than the verse from the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vedanti, which means there is one truth, but there are different paths to reach the truth. The concept of Shunya. I don't think we have enough time, even the next 5 days, if we just sit on this one concept, to understand what has really gone into building this concept. The concept of Shunya was conceived by Hindu sages, vindicates the culture of acceptance of the divergent and even that which is inconceivable. The ancient Hindu symbol of a circle with a dot in the middle known as a bindu symbolizes the void and the negation of the self, was probably instrumental in the use of a circle as a representation of the concept of zero. I know, Suhail, you will teach us something different, but hang on. Now, why do I say zero is important? Because zero, when the Arabs came to trade, became sifar. And from the word sifar, as you all know, comes the word cyber. And from the word cyber, you have now the entire IT age or telecommunication, radar, whatever. It's 1 and 0 binary system, and that's how computers work. Now, why this point is important is from an absolutely open mind, you had a viewpoint which was conforming and boxing you into little compartments. And as a society, you were being boxed into different sections, okay? So it's a question of who. Now, all of a sudden, it was not important of who you are. Who's Harry Dhaul, it doesn't matter. What you have is important. Suhail is not important, but he has a Ferrari, very important. Suhail is not important as an individual, but Suhail, I'm sorry, I'm using you as an example because you're outstanding. You're outstanding. So
I'll also respond.
I know.
When is history lesson?
By day after tomorrow. But what you have becomes all of a sudden important. Who does he know? How much money does he have, etc. So they brought in this Indian laws and Indian values, English language, Scottish banking, English form of land tenancy, liberty, equality, etc. But what also came with this is a development narrative. And this is what I wanted to come to by giving you a background that there were these two divergent flows in the cosmic thought process where you come to the development narrative. And that's what we're all dealing with today. When you say the epical shift of India and the whole meeting aspirations. Meeting aspirations is about development. But what is development? Under the chain narrative, karma was no more pious about deeds but about means to get rewards in the end. So sadly, the development narrative brought in a division among haves and have-nots. So all of a sudden, do you have or you don't have? Are you urban? Are you rural? Are you this? Are you that? So profit by all means became the underlying foundation of the new narrative. Now all of a sudden this business of getting the guy to cut my field and I'll cut your field went away. Said forget it. I want to make profit. To hell with you. Are there enough resources for this kind of development in the narrative? We shall discuss. Gandhiji had some thoughts. The underlying root cause for each of the revolutions, be it in France, America or Russia, was a conflict between have and have-nots. The French Revolution is classic. So is the American Revolution. The imposition of the democracy narrative as a means to equality. Roots of democracy. The word, as everybody knows, means democratas, democratia, rule of the people. But at the bottom line, it says rule of an elite. Please note. They were city-states. So when you talk about democracy in the forms of government, are you talking about the rule of the elite still? Or are you talking about root of democracy going to 1.2 billion people, something you need to look at. Now, the 1872 census took a very important turn, which is very important for this conference, I think. And that is that for the first time, the census had the word religion in it. And it was the first time between concept and religion, it became clear to the then ruling Muslim elite, which had been dethroned, that we will never ever be able to be rulers in India again, in case the British leave. We had population census and democracy, and it had cataclysmic effects, which divided the country, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, while equality in its true sense has never achieved the new narrative of equality through Westminster model of democracy, instead planted seeds of division among religions, among tribes, between people, non-tribals and classes. It's happening every day, even this morning. Manipur is right now, it's burning because non-tribals perhaps have been given some rights on land. I don't want to waste more time on, invest more time on this kind of stuff, but the points for deliberation are that the policy makers have to strike a critical balance, and this applies to regulators too, which is very difficult between the have and have-nots. And we have to meet the aspirations of the rich and the poor, the digitally connected and the unconnected, skilled and unskilled, urban and rural, educated and uneducated, would have to be fulfilled. And there's a point for deliberation as I come to the conclusion. The challenge for policymakers also to make sure that even with the best efforts are made for creating an environment of competition among business organizations in the best interest of the end users or consumers, it is also equally important to create a healthy enabling environment to make sure that business organizations eventually survive and grow in the best interest of industry and economy. So if I'm a regulator, I have to make sure there's competition, there are tenders, to make sure you get the lowest price in the interest of the consumer. But it can't be so low that you start having call drops because nobody's investing in the sector anymore. So I have a tough choice to make. I have, in fact, I call the regulators supermen. Over the next 3 days, we are going to be looking at various issues, and I just want to mark out 2, 3 new ones for those of you who are keen to know where we are going. One is about smart cities and smart energy, integration of energy storage. We have a master class for competitive bidding, the economic impact of judicial decisions. How do we go forward? India continues to be a myriad of thoughts and perceptions, and from that perspective, who is right and who is wrong? When you see this picture, I'm sure all of you will say, I feel sorry for the deer. But when you see this picture, perhaps you don't think you should be sorry for the deer. It all depends on who's looking at what. Because if you didn't get the deer, those little puppies would die. So back to the beginning. The epochal shift in the idea continues to remain an enigma. I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, let the deliberations begin. Without further ado,